Good evening. Well, we started back questions today. Any of you young people, did y'all look up Luke chapter 1? We're down a few cylinders here, so you're going to have to help me. Be loud, okay? Probably didn't pick the best night to start back or to start a series on the home. But anyway, here we go. Luke chapter 1. We're studying Luke. Y'all got it back there? Everybody good? Callan, you ready? So Luke was going to write Theophilus, and what kind of account was he going to write him? Orderly, an orderly account. So, in other words, as Luke begins this record of the gospel, he tells Theophilus, I'm going to give it to you in order. And so, it's in the order of the life of Jesus from beginning to end, right? So, he begins by telling him, this is going to have some order to it. And of course, you and I know what the order is and how it is arranged there in this account. As you go through chapter 1, it's a long chapter. Remember John the Baptist and remember Jesus, both prophesied, both mothers become pregnant. And as a part of this whole revealing of Jesus, the parents of Jesus are told that he will reign over the house of who? Jacob. For how long? Forever. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever. And so that's a huge prophecy, if you will, in the foretelling of the birth of Jesus. And then, at the end of the chapter, John the Baptist is born. And so, part of what happened to his father Zacharias was that he lost his speech. And so as a part of that, when the boy was born, they were asking his mother what his name was, and she was trying to tell him what his name was going to be, and they were like, well, now wait a minute. You don't have any relatives by that name. So finally, Zacharias tells them what the boy's name is going to be, that it's going to be John. But how'd he do it? A writing tablet. He had to get a dry erase board. Probably wasn't, but he had to get a marker board and get a marker and write John's name. His name will be John, because they just couldn't fathom why they would be naming this boy. Of course, they've been told to name him that, but why would you name a child not after somebody in the family? And so that was very confusing for them, and Zacharias was not able to speak, and so he had to get some kind of writing tablet there and write out John's name on it so they would believe him. So, Luke chapter 1 is a long, long chapter. I could have got 33 questions out of it, but I only usually get 3, and so a lot of material in the first chapter. Look forward to going through these one at a time, Lord willing, as the weeks roll on. Tonight we are scheduled to start a series on the home. I appreciate Brother Jim's prayer there, and it is serious business. I hope you'll take it serious. As goes the home, so goes the church. I hope you'll approach it that way. I hope you'll make it personal and that it'll be personal. That the Leoma Church is counting on my home to be strong. I hope you view it that way. The Leoma Church is counting on my marriage, if I am married, to be all that God wants it to be. The Leoma Church is counting on me as a parent, if you are a parent, to be the best godly parent that I can be. Not perfect, but to be the best one that I can be. My home has so much influence upon other people. And if we were to just start by asking this question, I always tend to try to ask this question, why would we study this? Well, I don't think I have to tell you that homes are in danger. A lot of homes look like this one on the screen, and unfortunately the people in it don't even know it. That's maybe even sadder than it looking like that. It's crumbling, it's broken, it's fallen down, and nobody's even seemingly paying attention to that fact. one of the huge factors in that, though not the only factor at all, is the decline of marriages, where you've got above 50% now divorce rate for the first time ever in the history of our country. We've gone over 50%. We've been hovering right under it for a decade now, but now we've gone over it. And so now every first marriage is failing at a rate of 51%, more than 1 out of 2. And the second marriages and third marriages are even higher. The percentage just goes up and up, which then begs the question of, it shouldn't be ironic to us that the largest demographic growth group in our country, according to the last census, is the cohabitors. They don't like what they're seeing with marriage, so guess what? They don't want to get married. And so they just live together. And that's happening. And that's growing in the largest percentage of any type of home demographic in our country in the last decade. And it's mainly among late 20s and early 30-year-olds. People who have never been married, they're living together. I don't have time to go into all of this, but if you'll just do some research on developmental issues among young people. Just do some Google searches about everything from anxiety to depression to suicidal tendencies. I mean, it's a long list. All the way to some of the things we've been, alcohol use and tobacco use and drug use, and it's starting earlier and earlier and earlier in children. And they are connecting a lot of this to things like the failure of the home. So the child's issues with development, which is happening much earlier now in life, are a result of, according to the psychiatrists and other professionals, according to the failure of the home. And then, if none of that's the case, you realize that every home in this building is under attack. It always has been. It always will be. You can put ADT on the door if you want to, and you can hang the sign in the yard, and you can put a shotgun behind every door if that's what you want to do. But the reality of it is you cannot keep Satan out of your house. As hard as you try, and as secure as you want to make it, you cannot completely eliminate him. I wished we could. I wished you could. I wished I could. I would vote for it if we could, and so would you, but we can't. And so he's coming in. He's attacking us, regardless of what security provisions we have in place. The home, our homes, our marriages, our parenting skills or design, our relationships with other people, everything is under attack if it's got anything to do with God and what God would want us to do. Satan is trying to attack it. And a lot of what we're seeing as it relates to the home is from society. And what I mean by that is people are going to work and they're talking about their home, and somebody at work is suggesting to them, well, you deserve a better home than that. You deserve a better life than that. You deserve a better marriage than that. You deserve a bigger whatever. And we start buying into those feedings from society. And so now all of a sudden we've lost our contentment. And now we're wanting more. We're wanting different. We're wanting something else. And so that's why I just say from society as a whole, wherever that may come from. What are some things we need to talk about? Well, the first one that I think we need to talk about is, what is a biblical view of the home? Maybe 2 or 3 weeks of that. What does a biblical marriage look like? What does biblical husband and fatherhood look like? What does biblical mother and wifehood look like? What does being a biblical child look like? And in case you haven't figured it out yet, if your parents are still living, you're still a child. I'm still the child of my parents, aren't I? I'm an adult child now. But what does that look like biblically? How can I honor my father and mother with my home? We'll look at some of those things as we go along. What is the seriousness of marriage? Have we lost that? Have we lost the holiness, the sacredness of marriage in our society? How do we strengthen the homes? You see, this is about, like all the time we talk about divorce prevention. And fair enough. And typically what we do is we get people that aren't married yet, and then once we get married, it's like, well, tough luck. You got to figure it out on your own now. How do we, it's like, do we do anything to help strengthen homes? You realize there's an alarming rate of divorce among people who have been married 15, 20, 25 years. I remember growing up, and I remember people saying to me, if you can make it through the first year of marriage, you can make it. Like if you can survive 12 months of each other, it'll be all downhill from there. And then there was that period, when I was a teenager, it was like the 7-year itch, right? So if you can make it 7 years in marriage, I believe if I was telling people I was about to get married today, I would say, if you can make it 37 years. I don't know. I don't know what, because used to, you didn't hear of people getting divorces at 15, 20, 25. And so I'm just wondering, what can we do to strengthen homes that have been established for 2 decades? Maybe need a little revival in the home and in the importance of the home. And then obviously, I think we need to look at what are attacking our homes. You might remember, I believe the year was 2015. I don't really remember 2000. And somewhere since 2008, I did a lesson here on the formation, the foundation, the fruit, and the foes of the home. Included in that lesson was also the fabrication of the home. I went back and rewrote it 2 or 3 times now, and I've added 2 or 3 things to it, so I really don't know what version you got, but you got one of the first versions of that lesson. And then somewhere down the line, maybe that was in 2015, we did a lesson on God's intent for the home. In that lesson, we talked about things like companionship and continuing the human race, and things like personal responsibility, where that is taught, how to be a responsible individual. We also talked about how God's intent for the home was a safe place, a place of rest, a place where you could go and not be criticized and judged, and where you could go and feel safe, feel wanted, feel loved. And so that was a couple of lessons, and I keep everything and reuse it quite a bit. So I went back and looked through all of those notes as I thought about where to start this. And I just kind of started it right here and kind of really hinged the whole series on this. I'm in 2 Kings 4 and verse 26. I'll give you a quick update here. Elisha has been to visit the Shulamite woman. And she wanted a son, and she got a son. And time passed, and her son has died. And so when her son died, she said, hey, I'll go to the man of God, and I'll inquire of him what to do. I mean, I requested this son, I got this son, and so I'm not sure what all that has to do with the home, but I want you to understand the verse in its context. She is headed to meet the man of God, Elisha, and he sees her coming, and he sends a messenger to run out to her. And he tells the messenger, when you get to her, here's verse 26, 2 Kings 4. Here's what I want you to ask her. Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right? And she said, King James Version, all is well. All is well. Everything is all right. Is everything okay with you? Is everything okay with your husband? Is everything okay with your child? It's everybody in the home that made up her home. Her son's dead, mind you. He's dead. He's dead till nearly the end of the chapter. And what's her answer? All is well. That's kind of our verse for the entire series. How are things at home? Whoever makes up your home, if it's just you, or if it's two people, a husband and a wife, or if it's 3 or 4, or maybe there's kids, maybe there was kids at one time and now they're grown kids. How are things at home? Is all well? That's the question we're asking, and that's the one we want to analyze over the next several weeks on Sunday night. So what is a biblical view of the home? I start with this question because I believe this is where the foundation of it all starts. And unfortunately, I'm afraid there's not anybody asking this question anymore. What does God want from a home? What does the Bible say about a home? I love Genesis chapter 2, and I don't ever get tired of studying this chapter. I've been through it dozens of times, and so have you. You remember in Genesis chapter 1, God decided that everything was good with the exception of man being alone. Remember, all was good. God created everything, and He looked out over the day, and He said, all is good. And then He gets to the 6th day, and He creates man, and He says, all is not good. And so then chapter 2 kind of gives us that explanation as to what God did. It wasn't that man was not good, it was that man alone was not good, God said. And so chapter 2 starts filling in the blank for us. He tells us what happened in chapter 1, and he gave the husband and wife there, Adam and Eve, some instructions and told them what to do, and that's found in chapter 1. But then chapter 2, he gives some details. And so in verse 18, when he says, it's not good for man to be alone. God decided back there on the 6th day in Genesis 1, I'll make a helper suitable, comparable, literally, and this is interesting to me. I love studying Hebrew because it's very clear in the Hebrew. It literally means the opposite of. Well, boy, that really tears down some popular beliefs of today, doesn't it? Because if God's view of the home and the original setup was the opposite of, then, was you here Wednesday night? No such thing as same-sex marriage, right? You can't have it if it's the same sex because it's opposites. God created an opposite to man. He didn't create something like man. He created an opposite to man that would be suitable, that would be a companion, that would be, and you adults in the room can go with me, comparable or comparable to the man. That's what He created. He designed it that way. It's right there in the Hebrew. And then what's even better is, you get down to verse 20, and God wasn't looking for Adam a boss, or He wasn't looking for Adam a servant. You see that? He didn't say, now Adam, I'm giving you bossship, nor did He say, Adam, I'm making a slave for you here. He said, I'm making you a helpmeet. I'm making one like to you. Because here Adam has been, and he's named all the beasts of the field, and he's named all the birds of the air, and no doubt, I can't say this for certainty, but I got to believe that God put him through that exercise for the purpose of recognizing he didn't have a companion. Why else would God do that? I mean, I guess they needed names, right? But why didn't God just put a name tag on them? You know, he could have done that. When he created the cow, he could have just wrote cow on its side and branded it. I mean, God's got the power to do that. He really didn't need Adam to tell them what their names was, did he? I mean, surely he could have come up with some more supernatural way to have done that, but he didn't. He chose to let Adam name them. Why? Well, in my mind, I'm thinking Adam's naming all these animals, and he says, well, this ain't fair. Where's mine? Right? I don't mean that selfish. I don't mean that harsh. I'm just simply trying to put myself in Adam's shoes, and here's this big, large farm, and he don't have a companion. And so what God did was he made for Adam a helper, a suitable helpmeet that would come along and complete him. Because also in the idea of opposite is that which takes the strength of more than one. And so God recognized that, hey, if we're going to have a home here, we're going to have the strength of more than one person. Adam is not suitable to do it all by himself. And so I'll make for him a companion. I'll make another who will bring strength to the table, and together they will complete each other. It's a beautiful biblical model. The problem is we don't seem to care for some people. Unfortunately, the society in which we live seems to reject it entirely. God is saying, listen, this is the way I designed it, and I designed it for a specific purpose. Now, I get it. Paul says, you don't have to marry. He tells the Corinthians, I just assume you're not married and remain even as I am. I get it. It's not a commandment. But if we're going to formulate a marriage or a home with more than one person, then it's imperative that we do it God's way. Anything different than God's way is bound to cause all sorts of issues. When we try to redesign it to fit our desires, our wants, our wishes, then terrible things come, and we've reaped the benefit, we've reaped the repercussions of those terrible outcomes. God says, I'm going to make a helper. I'm going to make one that can come along and recognize that man has some weaknesses, and she is going to provide in those areas of weakness, and he'll do likewise. And so Peter talks to husbands and tells husbands to live with their wives as the weaker vessel. There'll be some weaknesses on each side, and we'll serve each other in our weaknesses. And together we'll provide the strength that God intended. As I drop on down in this passage to verse 23, when Eve is revealed to Adam, I mean, man, he's just overjoyed, isn't he? You can't see it in the English, but in the Hebrew, it's just, Stephen mentioned it. It is a play on words there that he uses. This is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Is poetry, is what it is. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. And that is why, verse 24, a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. To leave and to cleave. I just want to close tonight with those two ideas. And I want you to think about it with me for just a moment. We're asking ourselves, what is a biblical model of the home, specifically tonight as it relates to marriage? So what does it mean to leave father and mother? I don't think this is exhaustive in any way, but just consider a few with me here. To leave physically. When I start premarital counseling, one of the first questions I ask is, where do you plan to live? That's none of my business, but it could be detrimental to your marriage. I love it when a couple comes in and they say, well, we really don't have a place. I'm thinking, well, why in the world are you thinking about getting married? We just thought we'd live in Mom and Daddy's basement. Okay. Red flag number one. Not because Mom and Daddy's basement's full of mold, although it might be. Not because Mom and Daddy's basement's not a good, cheap place to live, because it would be. There are challenges that come with that when you don't leave physically. One of the hardest things Chastity and I ever did was when we got married, we moved 40 miles away from our parents. One of the best things we ever did in our marriage was when we got married, we moved 40 miles away from our parents. We didn't have anybody but each other. I mean, it was like, hey, whether you like me or not, I'm all you got. You're 45 minutes from your mama. And it's going to take some gas money to get there. It's one of the hardest things, but it's one of the best things. Why? Because it forced us to physically be with each other. You live in Mom and Daddy's basement, and there's Mom and Daddy upstairs, And so you find yourself, whoever's Mom and Daddy it's not, they probably don't want to go there, right? Because it ain't their Mom and Daddy. Whoever's Mom and Daddy it is, well, they just stay upstairs with them all the time. Because it is their Mom and Daddy. It's a challenge. So when it says leave father and mother, there has to be a physical separation. But not just physical, but then there has to be some relationship changes. I'm a mama's boy. My wife will tell you. Always have been, always will be. I'm a mama's boy. When if you were to ask me who my priority was in relationships, it was my mama. And for the first few years of my marriage, she probably stayed there, if I'm just going to be quite honest and open with you. And I realize now the difficulty and the challenge. Relationships have to change. I got a new lady in my life, and it's not my mama. My mama's no longer my number one female. She's now number two, right? And so you have to change, relationships change and how they look. And unfortunately, some people just don't change relationally. So you see how that challenges a marriage emotionally. Emotionally. What do we mean by emotionally? Well, let me tell you. When I had a crisis hit in life, you know who I called? Well, I called Mama. That's who I called. Number one, Daddy would tell me just cry about it and go on, It'd be all right, you'll toughen up, you'll survive it. But Mama would listen. And Mama would talk, and Mama would help me think through it, and Mama would feel the way I felt about it, right? So if it hurt me, it hurt Mama, and we would hurt together. And we had this emotional attachment. Well, guess who I wanted to call when I got married? Mama, right? And so I would get home, and I would say, man, I've had a terrible day, and I've already told my mama about it. And my wife would say, excuse me? Right? I mean, you got to leave emotionally. It's okay to tell your parents, okay, but I needed to be calling my wife and saying, hon, I've had a bad day, and here's what's happened, and here's what caused it. And so as I think about this idea from Genesis 2 and verse 24, there has to be an emotional leaving, where priorities and relationships kind of change. It works the same way. You get a job promotion, and who's the first person you call? Well, it ain't Mama. Your spouse wants to know about that. And you tell mama later or daddy later. But you need to share good news with each other, right? How about financially? I'd be lying to you if I said our parents hadn't helped us. And I don't think there's anything sinful with parents helping children. But if I'm relying on my parents to keep me afloat, then how do you call that a marriage? Marriages need to figure out how to live and abide within their own means. And you've heard it all your life. My daddy's got a 4-door side-by-side, 4-wheel drive. It's probably worth both of my vehicles put together. My daddy's got a pontoon boat. My daddy's got an RV. My daddy's probably in debt to his eyeballs. I don't know. Ain't none of my business, but he got all this stuff. I kind of like it. You know what I mean? My daddy's got a new truck. My parents live in a new house. And it's pretty cool. If I'm not careful, my daddy's almost 60 years old. Guy's been working 50 years of his life. I hope he's not in debt to his eyeballs. I hope he's used his money wisely through the years. But if I'm not careful, guess what? Financially, I want to be where my daddy is. And I'm not. What I'm learning is how much my brother and I costed when we were growing up. Cost. I'll get that right one of these days. How much we cost growing up. I'm learning how expensive it is to raise children. My parents aren't doing that anymore, right? One of the most common pitfalls of marriages financially is that we want to be where our parents are. And they're 30 years down the road from where we are. 20 years at least. And then finally leave home spiritually. And isn't it sad to watch children grow up in a faithful, God-fearing home, and then the minute they get married, you look up and you go, where are they? It's sad. It's got to be terrible for mom and daddy. I'm just wondering, how do we help them to be ready to fly on their own spiritually? I mean, if we're going to prepare them to fly on their own emotionally, and if we're going to prepare them to fly on their own financially, and how do we prepare them to fly on their own spiritually? Where we can turn them loose with their faith, not our faith. And they be able to leave home spiritually. I heard several years ago now a guy say, the hardest part of parenting is trusting the job you did. Well, I don't know that feeling just yet, but I'm getting scared. I really am. To be able to turn them loose and trust what you've done as a parent. And I think about that especially in the realm of spiritually. But then the Bible says in Genesis 2 and verse 24, not just that there's a leaving, but there's also a cleaving. Cleaving to one's wife, as he's writing there in the masculine. Cleaving to one's spouse. So what does that look like? What is this idea of cleaving or holding fast, some translations say, or uniting together? What does that look like? Well, I got to thinking about that, and I thought, it's all about commitment, isn't it? Or dedication. And so you've got to dedicate yourself to that person. A lot of marriages are not what God designed because either one spouse or both are not dedicating themselves to the other. Paul makes it very clear in 1 Corinthians 7 that if you are going to get married, you belong to your spouse. Dedicate yourself to them, to their needs, to their well-being and betterment. It's a selfless way of living, and that's kind of hard for us as people because we tend to be by nature selfish. If we're going to have biblical homes, it's homes that's looking out for the well-being of the other, dedicated to them, dedicated to learn them. A lot changes when you when you go from dating to marriage, right? Because in dating, what are you doing? You're trying to learn them, right? One of the funny things in our marriage, and Chastity cringes every time I say this or start a story this way, she fusses at me all the time because I don't open the door for her. And my response to that is, I didn't open the door for you when we were dating. I don't get it, you know? I mean, if she was looking for a guy to open the door for her, I showed her when we were dating I didn't do that. It's on the opposite side of the truck than when I need to get in. So, it takes up time, you know? My point is, we're trying everything we can to learn each other. And then my fear is that when we get married, we stop learning each other, right? And so maybe that's why marriages fall apart at 10, 15 years. Because I learned enough to get me through a few years, but I've quit learning. And so I just told Joshua this afternoon, we all change as life goes on. And so the way my wife feels about things today is different than how she felt about them when we got married. And so I've got to dedicate myself to learn her continually. What it is that makes her happy or that upsets her. And that'll change as her life goes on. And so I'll have to constantly be learning, dedicated to share with each other. We don't have enough deep talks at our home. And I'm afraid there's a lot of marriages like that. We need to share with each other, share on a deep level. You know, this whole, hey, how are you kind of thing, it works great at church, but it don't work great in marriage. It's got to be more than that. We need to help people to understand the dedication of sharing life, sharing each other. What is it that God intended? Did you hear Genesis 2 and verse 25? They were both naked and unashamed. What does that mean? Well, forget the whole physicality of it. Think about it emotionally. Think about it relationally. They were united together, sharing together. Deep conversation and joy, happiness together. Which leads me to the final thought. Dedicate to enjoy life. Some things are hard, aren't they? One of the most ugliest words in our home is bills. You got any of those? They challenge your marriage, don't they? They challenge your faith. They challenge your well-being. They challenge your trust. They challenge job losses, natural disasters, car wrecks, terminal illnesses. How many more you need that are going to challenge us as people? There are going to be times in life and in marriage and in the home it ain't going to be joyful. So when it is joyful, let's make the most of it. Let's agree to try to make the best out of every situation, to be joyful together, to dedicate to having fun together, and being happy, and smiling, and acting like, whether you do or not, at least acting like you enjoy being married to each other. Convince the world around us that God created a wonderful institution. And when we do it God's way, it's beautiful. It'll work every time. It don't mean there won't be difficulties. It don't mean there won't be challenges. It don't mean there won't be hard days. But what it will mean is that I'm doing it God's way. And as long as you're doing it God's way, God will help you to do it His way. He's promised that. How are things at home? You may not be married. You may have never been married, or you may never want to be married. You may have been married and now you're divorced. You may one day want to be married to someone when you grow up. How are things at home? How are you doing? If you are married, how is your marriage? How strong is it? I hope it's excellent. I do. I hope it's excellent. That's what this study's all about, is that your home would be excellent, whoever's in it, and whatever it consists of. And I'll try to make this as broad as I can, realizing there are just some things that need to be handled specifically, and it may not always apply to you. But when it comes to the dwelling in which you live, is it godly? Is it holy? Based on how you're living right now, is your life pleasing to the Father? If not, I invite you to come as we stand and sing.